Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 14th episode of the Two Existential Dudes podcast. And what?
That's it.
All right.
Celebrating that we made it this far. We're officially, well, one episode late. We're officially into the teenage age.
I guess you could say that.
That's all. I just wanted to disrupt your flow there.
We age once a week. But as you can see, this is our Election Day special. Where, a quick note, we're recording this in advance, so we can go vote tomorrow. No,
neither of us are
18. Neither of us are of age to vote.
But we're recording in advance so that you can go vote. How old is our... Wait, well, no.
But that doesn't make sense.
How old is our viewer base?
Not 18.
Oh, and we're releasing it tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's good. You can tell we're great at planning these things.
Excellent. So, our topic today, we will not be discussing this particular election itself because...
We don't want to die.
Yeah. There's enough quote experts out there to discuss this election, and luckily it will all be over soon. Hopefully.
Something will occur. That's for sure. So now we've got past that. Let's get right into it, I think. So the first portion of this is in relation to the systems by which we vote. So I'd like to ask you first, what is the purpose of an effective voting method and what makes it effective?
Well, to talk about that, we kind of have to talk about the system of government more generally. And I think the way to segue into that is with a brief history lesson about the ancient Greeks and their system of democracy. And did they invent the system, or was it around before that?
If I'm not mistaken, they're the first to use the concept of democracy.
Okay.
I don't remember if they were the first to apply it, but I know they're the first to use the term at least.
Okay.
Particularly through Socrates.
Okay. So
and Plato, of course.
What they would have is like important like the smart people of the society. They would draft laws, but then they wouldn't be the ones to vote on them. The people as a whole would be the ones to vote on them, and if something gained a majority, then it became law.
So in effect, instead of, for example, the way our modern Congress works, where you have the legislator building and voting upon laws, the legislator would only build the laws while the community would vote on them. This is actually similar. Some countries still do this with larger things, such as, not necessarily a law, but when Australia had their flag referendum, they did it in the case where they went through the whole process and then the country voted on the referendum. Nothing happened because it was kind of not followed through. But in that case, it wasn't just the legislator or committee deciding.
Brexit be another example of the entire country voting on a major issue? Because the population did vote on that.
Did they?
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with it, but if they did, yes. I remember, if I recall correctly, there was an issue because that vote happened, and then there was a really long delay following it. I would still say that is the case, because they're voting their mind. It wasn't a survey, it was an actual vote.
But the principle here is that citizens directly influence laws.
This is referred to as a direct democracy.
Direct democracy.
Well, with representatives too. Well, no. Never mind.
In principle, it's just, this is the purest form of democracy.
Yes.
I don't think it requires the modifier direct.
Yeah, well, the purest form of democracy is everyone has a say and gives a vote to it.
Yeah.
How those are counted, who gets the vote, that's not necessarily part of it, but it's just the fact that it's power as an idea is split up amongst a group as opposed to a monarch having all the power, or a committee having all the power, as in the French Revolution.
So then we fast forward through a lot of history that I'm not familiar enough with to make a judgment on. Lots of
Wars.
lots of years of monarchy and war and systems such thereas.
Ooh.
Then you get to good old America, and the founding fathers. A democracy was considered, but it was ultimately decided on that this was not the best route for this experiment of a country to travel down. Because to them, democracy seemed like little more than mob rule, since it is that pure majority that makes all the decisions. And in reality, it kind of is, because a simple majority, or as I would like to stress, a politically active minority, could result in tyranny.
Absolutely. Look no further than the most common issue with the not necessarily the entire judicial system, but particularly with public trials. Whenever a jury is brought in, a long-standing issue has been the jury being influenced by factors other than reason, which is an argument in of itself, but in effect can lead to decisions and verdicts that aren't necessarily accurate. There are ways around that. The judge in the court can overturn things, and they can appeal, of course. But for the longest time, famously through Plymouth, there were a lot of issues where these individuals were effectively punished entirely through mob rule, even with minimal evidence. The best example is the Salem witch trials.
Yeah. Democracy.
Is my name.
Democracy, an analogy I've always heard to discredit it is two wolves and a sheep deciding on what to have for dinner.
Yes, everyone has a say. Yes, it's fair, but what's decided may not necessarily be what's the best thing in regards to principle.
Yeah. And that's where a little bit of foreshadowing to the other, I guess, democracy 2.0 improved. We'll get to that in a second. But another issue with democracy is that it forces everyone, even in the situation where you have the best of intentions among everyone, it still forces everyone to become an expert on every single issue. Whereas,
and as we discussed in, I think, episode 11 or 9, with the complexity issue, as that complexity and the scope of things you have to know increases, it's the vast majority of people either can never understand everything fully, or just decide to not care, which is why you see so many apathetic voters today, going in picking a name that they know or have heard once or twice. This is why somehow political ads are effective.
Yeah. When
they really shouldn't be, because they're just hilarious to watch. If you ever want to have a fun time just exploring like ethos, logos, and pathos, and like intentionally deceptive reasoning, just watch any political ad. It's awesome. And count how many logos there are in proportion to pathos.
Oh, certainly.
Anyways, now that I've constructively derailed us.
Another issue I alluded to earlier is that I used the term politically active minority, in that it doesn't even have to be a majority. It essentially just has to be the majority of those that are voting that can influence decisions.
Yeah, even if the country is 90 to 10 on an issue, if that 90% doesn't vote at all, or votes very low, but the 10% all of them do, and voice their opinion very strong, even if the thing, like, in that case, it's significantly more likely for the minority to carry that law through or that event through. And even in the case where they still don't win, the fact that they're an extremely vocal minority compared to the significantly larger, quieter majority, that makes them arguably sound correct, even if they're not. There's a psychological term for it in regards to because it's immediate to your mind and is most often appearing it sounds correct. Effectively, the more you hear something or the
mere exposure.
It's not mere exposure. It's a little more nuanced in that the best description is the more readily something comes to mind, the more you assume it to be true. This is why things like if someone is taught 2 + 2 is 5 their entire life, and that's the first thing that comes to their mind, they're most likely to accept that over a clear logical answer.
Foreshadowing to a future episode.
It's 5. Okay. I'm going to stop quoting books now.
Where was I going to go?
Democracy into the other type. What America became.
I had something before that.
What? Overrepresented minority.
Okay, yeah. I was going to make the point that not all registered. What?
Keep going.
Not all registered voters vote in presidential elections. Even less.
Never mind.
This man is freaking me out right now. He's giving me weird hand signals that I don't know what to do with.
I'm trying to get your cat to sit on your lap, but you're not picking up my signals at all. Yes, there you go.
Okay.
He might not do it. There it is. Yeah, see, there it is. I told you. Or rather, I tried to demonstrate.
Thank you. You're very good at this.
You're welcome. Anyways, now I've derailed us again.
So, I would argue less constructive this time.
Constructive for your psychological state at the moment. Oh, he might be joining our table. Well, there you go.
Now he's sitting on our notebooks.
Well, I guess we're not gonna talk about half that stuff.
I'm just gonna keep talking. And you can obsess.
You're really gonna sit and I'll remind. Okay.
Over my cat. So, very few people vote in the presidential elections relative to potential voters, registered voters. Not everyone that's eligible is registered. Not everyone that's registered votes in the presidential elections. Even less vote in midterm elections for things like senator, governor.
If I'm not mistaken, presidential is 40% of eligible voters, and I feel like congressional is 20.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember if that's exactly true, but that sounds right.
And then almost no one votes in off-year elections.
It's most readily available, therefore I assume it's right.
Almost no one votes in the off-year elections to where you elect local and state representatives.
Governors and such.
They probably heard that.
Get down. I need my notes, please. Bye-bye.
Now he's mad.
I'm sorry. Okay. Now that we've been...
Okay, so now we can...
Actually...
Finally segue back into...
I think that makes a great segue.
Democracy 2.0.
Evolution.
The republic system of government. If I add the suffix, then it immediately becomes conflated with a political party. I can't say Republican system of government.
Okay. All right, we're going to do this. So, for the purpose of today's episode, if we use the terms democratic or Republican, they have literally no attachment to the contemporary parties.
No.
And are not referring to them in any way. They are democratic, in this context, refers entirely to the concept of democracy, or Republican.
Republican.
That was a weird inflection. I'm sorry. It reflects entirely the notion of a republic, which we're getting into.
I'm very
just so we don't get shot to death.
I'm very glad we cleared that up. So we have to define republic because it's the definition is a bit fuzzier than
particularly compared to democracy.
Yes. So this is just one I kind of came up with on the fly, but also earlier, so not on the fly.
On the fly earlier.
Words have meaning. A republic is defined by representation of the citizens by representatives and the laws they create. Particularly as it pertains to a constitutional republic, which is what I'd say best defines the United States. Our Constitution offers certain laws that cannot be changed except with the consent of both the national legislature and a supermajority of states.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's break that down. So go through the first...
And those things that can't be changed, I didn't know exactly how to phrase that, but I wanted to allude to the concept of a republic being the rule of law, and that there's certain principles that you can't stray from.
So the best way to look at this, or the simplest way to look at this, is that a democracy is a system in which everyone typically directly... Okay, we'll go with direct democracy to make it specific. So everyone directly affects the government and has a say on every single law, but those laws aren't dependent on a singular constitution or a set of principles. They can be, as in the Greeks, they had their set of principles throughout their society, but they weren't legal principles in that they could be broken. As compared to a republic, in which typically it's built by representatives who, surprisingly, represent the citizens. So the citizens don't necessarily have a direct say, but they still have they should have influence upon those representatives. And so those representatives then discuss and build laws and systems based not necessarily on private principles, shouldn't it be, but are built on instead a constitution or a other form of written article. This is why...
which represent the universal principles of what the country is trying to...
Yes. Which is why so often when people discuss, when bigger issues come up in Congress, so often is the phrase American principles or constitutional principles brought up, because that's what it's supposed... There's supposed to be, for lack of a better word, prescribed principles that were born during the Enlightenment to try and represent the most effective and most humble in character country. That's the wrong word, but we'll use it.
Where do we go? We could talk about why that's good or why that's bad, or do you have any thoughts on that?
So we'll go with the good first.
Okay.
A democracy is good, or direct democracy. So, first of all, democracy can technically include republic, just because it's kind of the same category as compared to like communism and other things.
That's why I said 2.0.
Right. Well, yeah, you have what we think of as direct democracy.
Because you have the voice of the people being heard, but you have those principles that that shouldn't be strayed from.
Yeah.
And that's why, like in America, to add an amendment to the Constitution, you need not only both houses of Congress, but you need, I think, 2/3 of states.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I believe that's why it's a supermajority in order to change the Constitution. Because when you're changing the Constitution, essentially you're changing the principles by which all other laws have to be made.
Well, yeah, a singular law, when it's designed, is intended to serve a contemporary purpose and try to at least serve a future purpose as well. But it's built largely out of and around the amendments, particularly the Bill of Rights.
Yes.
And then the Civil Rights Bill as well now. And also things like the 13, 14, 15s, which have to do with African Americans getting citizenship. And that's interesting because compared to a direct democracy where a majority can, in theory, take control of and change that stuff and change the principles on the fly, the republic, by having such a high bar for changing those quote national principles, in effect makes it it takes longer, of course, and makes it so that you have to really, I suppose, reflect on it before deciding on it. This is why the Civil Rights Bill took 30 years to really get through. And truthfully, that same bill had been in, if I'm not mistaken, the first draft of it was in like 1870 from some of the women's rights movements. That was like the first real one of it, and then it literally took until almost, is it 1956? Feels right. Most readily available.
Feels right.
Feels right. That's the new quote going on a shirt. But the point stands there that it took it took longer for that change to occur, but arguably by taking longer forced it to mature and become something that is much more effective. The Civil Rights Bill that we've eventually and finally got does significantly more for citizens than some of those early things would have done.
Than if it had been passed.
And even some of the earlier laws passed are completely overstated by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which freed slaves,
13th
gave them
was
citizenship, and gave them voting.
Citizenship voting.
Yeah, in that order. In that, those amendments were considered and took the patience to get through. And in effect, that's why a direct democracy can be an issue, in that it can be swayed by quick movements. When compared to a republic, which in principle should take a lot more to change. Otherwise, saying that it's less of... It's like going through teenage years would be the democracy, but going through adulthood would be a republic. Not to put value on either of them. Both have their merits, both have their downfalls, but one takes longer to change.
And I guess one of the downsides someone could point to with a republic is that it did take so long for some of those things to happen, but it also has prevented a lot of not so great stuff from happening just because of very quick populist opinions from forming.
And thinking on the other side of it, because they're amendments and larger bills, they're much harder to get rid of. That's why we don't talk about the people who contested the Civil Rights Bill actually getting it being effective, because it wasn't. And won't be. Same thing with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and the 19th for women's voting. Because they were such processes to get through, it's much more difficult to revert it.
Because they are now ingrained as principles in our Constitution.
American principles.
Whereas when you look at just vanilla laws or executive orders, to be more dismissive, those can be changed very quickly, and that's why you can hear about a president's accomplishments being undone in the first month of the next administration, because they didn't have the support, or they didn't have the support to get that done in a way that really changed the country permanently.
Yeah, a good example of how much it took is the 18th and 21st Amendments, which were in regard to prohibition of alcohol. The prohibition and temperance movement,
which totally worked,
was a movement that really started in like the 1830s and took until 1899, I think, for them to get the first the 18th Amendment, which banned alcohol in consumption, travel, and production. But it then took several more years to get that amendment undone, and one amendment in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's to say that the temperance movement in its small populist forms could not affect the government as much as they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But overgrowing in time and becoming something that a lot of people regarded as necessary and a principle led to it becoming a rule. And really the only reason it was removed was because it did more it economically hurt the country is what it did in the end, which is why a lot of the reasons it was revoked. Prohibition was revoked, sorry. That's all.
All right.
Yeah. I thought I had more, but I don't.
So do you think we fully covered those,
I think we have.
at least to the extent to which we are capable?
Yeah, you can always go into more depth about those. Plato wrote a book on it, which is a masterpiece. But you can always go more depth, but we do not have the... What is that stance?
I'm stretching.
Okay.
It symbolizes moving on to our next topic.
I just look up and Luke's got this like hands on the hip, like chest out look. I'm like, okay, all right, Plato. So, voting systems, the fun part, where Andrew gets to nerd out like crazy.
I think you asked a question right before I took us on a 25-minute long tangent.
I did ask a question. So my question then was, now that we've discussed the government forms and some of the principles that go into them, what is the purpose of an effective voting method, and what makes it effective?
I would presume you have an answer to this.
I do have an answer.
Okay.
At least a personal answer based on what I've read.
Then your answer will be better than anything I can come up with off the cuff. So, go.
So my most general answer that goes in regard to most forms of government is a proper voting method accurately represents the population in regards to principle, belief, and political leanings. Go ahead and read it.
I blacked out there for a second.
It's alright, I do that every time you read something.
I'm sorry.
It's always good, but I always don't know what you said. I have to read it.
That's why I try and stress each word when I read.
Why? Would.
Because slow.
You do that to me.
Now that's just
and make
too
me
slow.
think about these things.
You
For an extent. Anyways. Constructive derailment.
Accurately represents the population in regards to principal beliefs and political leanings. Well, that is a fantastic definition. Thank you.
All right. Now with that down, unless you have any contention with it or want to corroborate or clarify.
I'd say that is a very republic-centric, to create a term, definition, because it makes strong references to those principles, beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if it was solely based on democracy, then it would probably just have to do with political leanings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because those principles aren't defined.
Mm-hmm. And in truth, I did hesitate when writing it. If going through of course I had to use 3 because 3 is always the magic number. But I wondered, do I want to have political leanings in there? And conversely, do I want just political leanings and not the other two?
Mm-hmm.
Because depending on the government you're asking, it depends.
And of course, in societies with no voting,
it doesn't.
That obviously doesn't apply.
It doesn't represent anything.
Because they don't want represent anyone's ideas or beliefs or principles represented. Anyway. I also like your next thing.
All right. So for this next section, we're going to go through some of the different voting methods used by other countries. I don't have a lot of countries as examples, but these are the methods by which you can have better voting methods.
Who needs examples?
Right, I have some and all. So the first one here is under the category easy voting, also termed as bad voting. This is the most famous one, which many people have heard of. It's referred to as first past the post, or winner take all. And the best way to think of this one is whoever has the majority, not necessarily 51%, wins.
Plurality.
Yes. Yes. There's plurality in the other one.
Plurality and majority.
Is that it?
And minority. And supermajority.
Could you define plurality for us?
Plurality is if you have a collection of more than two ideas, it is the one that has the most, but not necessarily a majority, which would have to exceed 50%.
Okay, yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just said yeah like 6 times, I'm sorry. A majority then it requires 51%, more than half.
Yeah.
And a supermajority is 2/3 typically. Conversely, a plurality is just whoever has the most. And it's not hard to see why this system's bad.
Yeah.
Look no further than the fact that you can immediately have minority winners. If you have 7 people run, it is not a stretch to argue that someone with 25% could win.
Yeah.
Which is the most commonly attacked issue.
Which is why this system lends itself so heavily to two parties.
Getting ahead of me.
Oh, I'm
Getting ahead of me.
sorry. We're just on the same
You're just
page
taking my
all
kickers.
the time.
There's a term for that too. Get ready. But this is the system the United States uses for all of our elections, or at least most of our general elections. Our presidential election is whoever has the most. And the issue with this is that, like you said, it always results in a two-party system due to strategic voting, which we'll talk about. And this is referred to as the spoiler effect, in that, I'll just go through a short example. Say you have 4 parties running, 2 of them do pretty well, and 2 of them do pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
In the next election, everyone remembers what happens, and the people in the 2 worst parties realize they don't have a chance.
Yeah.
So they split their votes and go with the candidate they most like, or
out of the 2 remaining.
Right, out of the 2 remaining, they go with the candidate they either most like or can tolerate the most. This is why third parties don't work in the United States.
Yeah.
In that they will never have enough votes unless they have a sweeping majority, like an absolute sweeping majority over the government, in order to take a position of that caliber. Shh. Oh, yeah, I know first past the post is bad, but you don't have to tell me.
That was unprovoked.
But, and that's the issue with this one, that so many people attack most often, in that it doesn't allow for a varied government.
Mm-hmm.
Even in something like, for example, British Parliament, where the government isn't, quick political science lesson, in Britain, their parliament is not voted directly, but it's supposed to represent the percentages of political parties in the country. So that's why they have more of each group than we do, and that we have 50-50 and some independents most often. They have conservatives, Labor Party, the Green Party, the KPIP, or wait, no. I don't remember the term of that one. It's the Independence Party too.
You're the one that's moving there. I don't have to know these.
It's fine. But I use that as an example to say, even they have this issue where through their local elections, which is the way they vote them, a county that has a vast mix of those parties, the candidate with 20% wins and represents the entire shire, as they're termed, in the government, which is where it gets attacked so often.
So, unless you have anything on that, would you like to move into what you have aptly termed on the paper, better voting?
I really would like to move into this one. Okay. So for this, most of the types here that we're going to talk about are in regard to individuals running for parties
Yes.
and not
Issues.
not like various representatives representing one county. Does that make sense? So a single individual, like
Yeah.
a presidential race,
Like
or a
one
governor.
person, one winner.
Yes, one winner as opposed to, say, 4 in a county. So the first one that is most often charged as being much better, which it is referred to as the alternative vote, or ranked choice voting. So to illustrate this one, we'll go through a day at the post office. You go in and vote it. So when you go in, you can just mark one candidate with an X to say you want them to win, or you can start numbering them in order of preference, stopping when you don't care anymore. So at that point, the rest of your vote doesn't matter. It's just those numbers. And the way what is really nice about alternative vote is effectively that it's simulating several elections occurring instead of just the single one. So if we go back to our example before where 2 parties did well and 2 parties did badly, alternative voting, after the amounts have been tallied up, the smallest, hold on, let me get there. The group that received the smallest number of votes is removed from that election. And the votes of those citizens are sent to their second choice.
Yes.
And then from there, the second least popular candidate is also removed. And all their votes go to their second or third choice.
And this continues until one candidate possesses a majority of the votes.
51%.
50 plus 1.
50 plus 1, sorry. Thank you for clarifying.
Numbers mean things.
And this, funnily enough, it does technically work its way to being a 2-party system through its method, but by allowing or by simulating additional elections within itself, it gives a more accurate representation. For example, say candidate 1 initially had 33%.
Yeah. And
they were to be the winner. But when you go through alternative voting, candidate 2 actually is the winner. And 66% of the population agrees with, 66% of the population agrees with them, as opposed to the 33.
Yeah.
Thus, not giving a perfect representation, but a better.
So candidate 1 has a plurality of people that agree with them, but then, like, let's say 33%, but then they've got 66% of the population that absolutely can't, completely disagrees with their ideas.
Yeah, and that's the issue with first past the post, is that you can have a plurality winner of 33%, even though 66% disagreed with them, or wanted someone else, rather. And by doing alternative votes, say all of that 66%, for example, went to candidate 2. Well, there you go. There's your candidate that most represents the population and has an actual majority, 50 plus 1. And this is the one that's used, if I'm not mistaken, Australia uses it. Other than first past the post, it's the most common because it's the easiest to do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I have maybe not a counter, but a question. I'm interested to see how you'll answer it. So, as I was researching ranked choice voting, one thing I saw that is more complicated, but some argued better accurately represented the population, was a runoff style of elections where you have different rounds. This happens in some states where you have the first general election where if a candidate reaches that majority right away, then they win. But if not, then the top 2 candidates they go into a second round where only those 2 choices are available, and then it has to be a majority the second time around. And that could be extended to maybe first round has all of the candidates, the second round has 3, and then the third round has 2, and it would go until someone reached a majority. The argument people make for that is that people can, and obviously in this system, each person gets 1 vote each time, but the argument that's made for it is that it puts candidates against each other to, it forces, sorry, I'm kind of,
Go ahead. I'm just trying to piece it together as you go.
it forces the candidate to change throughout the process in order to represent the most people, rather than people sort of settling on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Mathematically, it's doing the same thing as ranked choice.
Yes.
Because you'd assume everyone would choose the same candidate in the order they would have ranked them anyways. And it's interesting that you point out that it's argued people would change candidates would change their arguments based on the sway of the public, or trying to include as many people as possible and actually have a candidate they agree with as opposed to tolerate the most. Was that accurate to say?
Yeah.
Okay. My issue with it is that it still suggests strategic voting.
Yeah.
Which is
how would it suggest strategic voting?
So first of all, strategic voting is when you go into the voting booth and think about how everyone else votes. This is why in the United States elections, when we go in there, even if you are a staunch third-party voter, many of the third-party people don't vote they vote a large party because they know they can't win. So they have to vote strategically instead of the party they actually want or favor the most, at least. In strict alternative vote systems, this eliminates strategic voting because they can choose whomever they want in whatever order they want, and they don't have to think about, okay, this candidate has a better chance than this candidate, so I'm going to go with them. By making it a physically, each election is an actual event system. Got to finish the sentence.
Yeah.
I don't know how much it would do it, but I wouldn't be surprised if that forces people to still consider how likely their candidate is to win.
I mean, it could happen psychologically, but mathematically that wouldn't be necessary, because in either case, if your first choice reaches 50%, then they win, even if you're. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. In either case, 50% is the threshold of victory.
Yeah, and it should be.
And one of the issues with this system is that a lot of times people don't, if they're staunch third party, they don't end up, they just vote once, either for their third party candidate or their number 2 choice, and then just don't come back.
Yeah, and that'd be the same as putting just an X and not filling out the rest of the ballot.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'll have to do some real research into the nuances between the two. Fascinating.
I only know about this because sometimes on election night, you'll get like a really red or blue state, but they can't call it because that candidate has to get 50% of the vote.
Fascinating. Well, now to go a little lighter, we have one you can use with all your parties and friends. This is referred to as approval voting. And to put it short and simply, who is okay with who? So the example I like to use for this, because it works best in a local setting, is that you're going out to a restaurant with friends. Who's okay with this one? Who's okay with this one? Who's okay with this one? Whoever has the majority wins. Because if it's one vote each, you both then have to choose the best one you like the most, and also it encourages plurality as opposed to majority. But by making it who's okay with, you're going to get closer to a majority. Which is why whenever I do that situation, I usually go there. Because satisfies the highest number of individuals. And this, I suppose, is a very basic form of alternative vote. In that you can choose multiple.
So you get
also known.
You get multiple votes, and you don't necessarily rank them.
Yes, yeah. You can just it's who's okay with, and you raise your hand. There is another one. I don't think it's.
Hold on, before you move on, I have a quasi rebuttal to this.
Go ahead. I'm just reading some stuff.
This form, I would argue, might simply encourage negative voting, in that people will be more focused on who do I dislike rather than positive voting, which would be who do I want to be there, which look no further than this election for that. And I think you would get a lot of that because people would just fill out anyone but that person, regardless of whether they agreed with all those other people or not.
Yeah, that's the point.
Okay.
Yeah, I see the concern that it's not representing specifically one they want, but rather one they're okay with.
Yeah.
But if they want to stress one over the others, they can just check one.
Yeah.
So if I really like Olive Garden and I don't like anywhere else, I only vote for Olive Garden. But if I'm okay with everything except Red Lobster, I vote everything else. Or if I would prefer Olive Garden, but I'm okay with most things,
We should go to Olive Garden.
We should do that.
Now I'm hungry. We should go to Olive Garden sometime.
We should do that. Have another 4-hour discussion. But yeah, that one's the party trick of them that you can use as a friendly thing to do, and it doesn't incite disagreement because you get the vast majority of people agreeing with being okay with something.
Yeah. All right.
You are very vocal today. All right. So anyways, I have 2 more. I'm not great at explaining them, but I just like to mention them at least for the viewer to look into if they're interested. These 2 here have to do with electing multiple candidates. For example, you have a region and you get 3 or 4 representatives for that region, and so you vote all of them in some manner, and that group represents the region instead of just one candidate. And these 2 here are referred to as the single transferable vote and the mixed member proportional or MMP voting systems. If you're interested in them, go look into them. I'm not great at explaining them, but they're the most mathematical that I've seen.
Okay.
Do you know about them?
I'm not familiar. I will have to do more research on that. But as you were talking about that, it kind of reminded. Not even reminded. I guess I came up with some spontaneous questions I wanted to ask.
Spontaneity.
That I've heard people ask, and I've never really grasped a particular opinion on, but this has to do with the executive branch of government in the United States,
mm-hmm.
specifically the cabinet positions or the non-elected
mm-hmm.
positions.
Yeah, the appointed stuff, such as the cabinets, most namely.
Attorney General, mm-hmm. things like that.
Secretary of State, and all of who, funnily enough, are the people who, if a lot of people start dying, succeed the president, the president.
Oh, if a lot of people.
Fun fact.
If 3 people die.
Fun fact, the advisor for the Department of Education is higher on the list than the Secretary of Defense.
Really? Wow.
Yeah,
I need to look into the line of succession.
Yeah, the line of succession, you have president, vice president,
Speaker of the House,
president, pro tempore, and
Who?
then pro tempore.
Please enlighten me. I have no idea.
The pro tempore, I think that's what it is the longest by tradition serving member of the Senate. Not the majority or minority leaders, but the longest serving member. They're effectively the Speaker of the House in that they control the practices of the Senate and basically make sure things get done.
Okay.
I forget if it's an elected position or not, but
Well,
is
it
most
would- it
typically
wouldn't
the
be a-
oldest chair.
Oh, okay.
Most typically.
Because
But
that would be the first. Because the president and vice president, obviously, that's voted on
mhm.
in the electoral college, and then the speaker of the house is the House of Representatives is determined by population proportions. So
Mhm.
those three would be pretty solidly in the realm of selected by the people.
Mhm.
Whereas the Senate, that's the first one that's selected in a way by the states, because that's the point of the Senate, to give voice to the states.
Mhm. Yeah, because the House is by being proportional, is supposed to
And
represent
then-
the citizens.
Okay, so continue the line of succession.
But from there, I don't know it exactly, but in effect,
it becomes cabinet members.
the line of succession
Is the
cabinet.
Secretary of State first?
I think it's the Secretary of State.
Okay,
But it's the
so that would be the first non-elected at
Mhm.
all position.
Yeah, it's the cabinet members, and get ready for this, as they appeared historically.
Oh Lord,
Which is
that
why-
needs to be.
Which is why the Department of Education is higher on the list than
Secretary of Defense.
the Defense. What's the newer one that came around with Bush? Oh, it has the crazy name. I forget what it is.
Housing and Urban Development.
I want to say Social Security, but I'm gonna look it up. This is gonna really bother me that I don't remember it.
Secretary of the Interior.
That one's pretty high up on the list. We gotta look. All right, we're going to Wikipedia. Current order. Here we go.
While he's doing this, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Literally no one. As you may have known by this point, they are our best and worst supporters, and they provide us with absolutely nothing, and we show absolutely no appreciation for the nothing with which literally no one provides us with. Please use the promo code. Is it
Nothing. With 3 exclamation points and a question mark.
Obviously.
I mean, it just makes sense.
The exclamation points signify your excitement to be patronizing the nothingness that supports us in no way, and the question mark represents the questions you have for what literally no one provides us with, and can provide you in your daily life as well. So this has been a message from literally no one.
Are we done?
Back to you, Andrew.
So I have the list here. So it's President, Vice President, Speaker of the House, President pro tempore, the Secretary of State, Treasury, Defense, Attorney General.
Okay, so education is not above defense.
Just wait. It gets better.
Okay.
Interior. So up through the Attorney General, those are the ones that were around with Washington. So when the succession was finalized, the main majority of them were in an order that makes sense, but it's as you get past that where they add them as they appeared historically.
Okay.
So just wait, you'll see. So after that you have Treasury, okay, Interior, Agriculture, Commerce, Labor, that all makes sense. Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, we're getting a little weirder now. Transportation, Secretary of Energy, Education, Veterans Affairs, and then finally the Secretary of Homeland Security. Now, I am no politician, but if 17 people die in regards to presidential succession, if 14 people die, I think that's an issue for Homeland Security and not education. So,
well, I think at that point it's at that point it should be, assuming we haven't devolved into military rule and the highest ranking general just hasn't taken over.
So if you
then it seems like it should be someone elected
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting that it's the advisors first, but that's fine.
We need a secretary of crises who just sits in an undisclosed location waiting for crises.
Well, so the next time you watch the State of the Union, get out this list, see who's not there. There's always one not there.
Designated survivor.
There's always one not there. So play the game, see who's all sitting there, because everyone will be in the room for that. Because it's a bigger deal. Discover who's the one. Anyways,
I'm pretty sure I asked you, should those positions be elected? And then we went off on that tangent. So should those positions be elected? And how would such positions function?
so the advisor, as its regular position, should not be elected, because if you have elections through it, you very quickly get into political differences. That's why all of the advisors are the same party as the president, because they get along and they can work together. Because unfortunately, parties don't work together anymore.
If not, you
ever.
get more gridlock.
Which, for the executive, while the legislative branch can take longer, and it's okay-ish to have those gridlocks to work things out, the executive branch is a full-time job and requires constant action, and therefore cannot have slowdowns. That's why even when Congress shuts down and the government goes stop because of the budget or something, the executive branch mostly stays in function. In regards to succession, it should be an elected position because it would represent the people, right? I mean, that seems like a clear principle given the setup of the Constitution. I would argue the intention of them being the advisors is not so much that they represent the people as much as their positions that are increments of power in the government and influence, rather. Which is why Secretary of State and Defense are so high on the list, because if the first 4 people die, that Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State has to be good at working with other countries at that point. Yeah? Does that satisfy your question?
And I'm not taking a position on this because I don't really know my answer to it. But it seems like since these people are in such positions of power and are so... And they run departments themselves and that employ, first of all, way too many people, but they're in charge of these vast departments that handle all sorts of things. Why at that point should they be appointed and not elected?
Truth be told, the original Constitution did not include them.
Yeah.
It gave the president power to provide advisors, but it was not a position that they necessarily knew they would need.
Yeah.
So when Washington became president, his cabinet was set the president of having a cabinet. So technically, a president could go without it. It would not make sense to do so because you wouldn't be able to operate the country by yourself.
Well, yeah, at this point,
but
it's far too bloated.
Yeah, but even in the time of Washington, it might have been effective to not have a cabinet because it would have been one individual working each of those. Conversely, having a specified individual who does each thing allows the president themselves to focus on different things and the overarching issues, but each of those individuals to really hone in the skill of those things.
Yeah.
So it does beg the question of, given how much it has bloated, is it necessary now to make those positions electable? Because they're not technically permanent.
Yeah.
They are by president. That's why every advisor, most of them lose their job if a party switch happens.
Yeah.
Because if you notice, the entire list was the same party, other than the Speaker of the House currently. It's the only one on the list, fascinatingly. Anyways, that was constructive in derailing us.
What about the vice president? Should the vice president be a separate no.
Oh boy. Remember the time when the vice president was just the runner-up in the presidential
Oh
race?
Lord.
They realized that mistake quick and fixed that. All right, I have one more question before you to kind of wrap this up.
What happens if we have an electoral college
No,
tie?
no, we're not doing electoral college.
What if we do that tomorrow?
We are not doing electoral college.
No. I wasn't debating the electoral college, but if there's a tie, are you familiar with this process?
It's been a little while. Would you like to enlighten me?
So what happens is the House of Representatives picks the president, but not in the way you would think, because each state has to vote all of their Congress people for the same person.
Mm-hmm.
So the state legislatures vote, and then the Congress people have to vote along what the state legislature said.
Well, I guess I suppose that's just emulating the electoral college.
Yeah.
In that it's states, not individuals.
With much less people voting. Because the state legislatures.
How many are in the Senate or the House of Representatives? It's been so long.
435.
Thank you. And the electoral college is 530?
538.
38, that's right.
Because
the proportions are not the same.
It's 435.
Everyone gets at least three.
House of Representatives, 100 senators, 3 electors from the District of Columbia.
Ah, fascinating.
So, back to the president and vice president in the event of a tie.
Oh no.
Or no one, or it doesn't have to be a tie. It could be just no one reaching 270 electoral votes.
Mm-hmm. Which has happened.
So, despite the fact that the House of Representatives is Democratic, has majority Democratic right now,
mm-hmm.
the state legislatures would essentially at that point be picking the president, which
mm-hmm.
would result in a majority Republican. It would either result in a majority Republican election or a tie. A second tie on top of the tie we've already had.
Another tie.
So then what happens then is there's no real contingency for this because they never
has happened.
They never want it to happen. So at that point,
this would be the year that
at that point they just keep the state legislatures and the House of Representatives just keeps voting.
Yes, the solution to deadlock is continuous voting, because that will change things.
But wait, there's more.
Oh no! I love bureaucracy.
Because the Senate picks the vice president.
Mm-hmm.
But in that case, it's actually the real Senate that picks the vice president,
and not the state's Senate.
But wait, there's more.
Oh no!
Because these are the people voting are the results of the most recent election. So let's say we have an electoral vote tie tomorrow, but the Senate is also a tie. So we have a 50-50 tie, and normally in that case the vice president would break the tie, but the Senate's voting on the vice president. Well,
so who's breaking the tie then?
So in that case, you would essentially have Mike Pence electing himself vice president of the United States.
Is that how that works?
Yes.
Who designed that? Oh, I love when the system just falls apart ad absurdum. Anyways,
well, that was fun.
It seems you got that out of your system now.
I just find that process so funny.
It's so excessively complicated.
And the fact that for that time you would have, well, in this case you would have Nancy Pelosi as president during all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets into a whole other conversation, because let's be honest, if that happened, we'd have bigger fish to fry, because both parties would be sending all of the lawyers in to try and dispute all of this.
Mm-hmm. Constantly. And I'm sure the Supreme Court would immediately bring everyone and be like, guys.
Ooh, that's a great segue to talk about
the
role of the Supreme Court
of
the United States.
I had one more question, and we're going so deep. Do you want to do it? Do you want to do this?
The Supreme Court?
Do you want to do Supreme Court?
No.
Okay.
I'm not. I didn't prepare for that.
Now that that discussion happened, my question doesn't really fit in context anymore, but you'll have to bear with me.
Okay.
So, we talked a little bit before about the issue with voter turnout, particularly like even the presidential election. The biggest one is usually only like 40 to maybe 50% of eligible voters. There is another way you can do it, referred to as compulsory voting. This is used in Australia, most famously, in which if you don't go vote, you're fined. So you're compelled to vote, or rather forced to vote.
Government coercion. That's a fun topic.
So it's the government coercing you to speak your voice, to exercise your freedoms of speech.
So this is what you've been leading up to.
This is the one that's neat. This is the Australia one I've been writing about for the past week.
Okay. No. Because while the government may be able to coerce you into voting, they cannot coerce you into informed voting.
So you're saying by making it coercive, you're gonna just get a less informed population voting?
Yes. And
because you can't force education.
This is on top of the already uninformed electorate, who's usually voting on character anyway, but whatever.
So would you say that it is more effective in the election to have a small minority of educated voters as compared to the whole population of uneducated voters?
I would say,
regardless of political stance.
I would say as a matter of principle, you would certainly never want to have the government deciding. You would never want a barrier of entry towards voting to where you have to be, quote, educated.
I mean, education tests are what they used in the South when slaves got...
Yeah.
When African Americans, rather, got voting right.
You would certainly not want that, but I'd say giving the people the option to opt out of elections by not voting is certainly better than making people vote.
Even if it's less of the population than...
Yes. Because what you're essentially saying at that point is, I don't care enough to vote, so why would we want that vote to count?
Right. When they might just waste the vote and
Yeah.
vote arbitrarily. Interesting.
And it's not... I'm certainly not arguing that there should be any kind of barrier to entry or limit on the number of people that can vote.
Well, that's illegal.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my take on that. That is a very interesting thing, and I'm glad you.
Worth researching it.
I'm glad you saved that.
Most people I ask, it's a very different, and a large mix of opinions on it.
What do people use as the support for that?
Well, the question I asked you, would you prefer a small educated voter base or the whole of everyone?
Personally, I would.
That's the question, is what answer are they going to give? Because I still don't know where I stand on it, because I haven't really considered it.
I think
enough.
everyone would prefer a smarter voting base that knows what they're voting on, but you can't really have a government system that makes that happen. You
can't really enforce
yeah
that kind of education, and it's really difficult to
so you shouldn't
get that through a school.
You shouldn't be enforcing that either way. You can't tell people how educated they need to be, but yeah, that no on that one.
Fascinating. I always love hearing what people think, because that one's the one that most people know immediately where they stand on, and you seem to have. Interesting. All right, that is all the notes I have.
All right. I think that's a good stopping place. We got through a lot today.
Before we start covering things we shouldn't cover.
Yeah.
You're gonna
The
make
Supreme
me,
Court
you're
and
gonna
the
make me do
electoral.
that, aren't you?
Someday. It won't be as topical, maybe.
Oh yeah. The Supreme Court is a really fun discussion. It's just you have to be very careful with it.
Yeah.
Like, hear that, listeners?
Okay, so I will now go to my election prediction.
No.
I'm-
I will tackle you
I'm-
over this table.
I'm kidding. We're not live. It's okay. All right.
The
So,
audible click of your keyboard.
of course, and signifying that we're wrapping things up. So, thank you for joining us today for our Election Day special that was probably more informative than most of the stuff you are hearing about the actual election.
Probably.
I mean,
Let's change that to an is.
yeah,
Wait, that is what? Wait,
let's not.
never mind that.
We don't have to pat ourselves on the back,
But we're gonna pat ourselves.
I'm
on
also
the back.
not above demeaning the current political state of everything.
Where's the fun in not doing so?
So anyway, thank you for joining us today. This was a fun one for us to do.
Mm-hmm.
We really enjoyed it. And a few housekeeping things. We will be either off next week or doing some sort of filler throwaway garbage episode under a different name that will probably end up being unlisted.
I love when he just makes decisions in front of me, live on camera.
Or the more likely thing is we'll be off next week. We will be reading a book.
Did you get your book yet?
Yes, I did.
Sweet, I got mine.
For episode 15.
Special episode.
Yeah.
And we do have an even specialer episode coming.
Oh yes.
Or at episode 20. So
Oh yeah.
subscribe. Make sure you're following the videos. Hit that ringer bell so that you know when that one comes out, because it will be a big deal.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you haven't followed our Instagram yet, do that. We also send out big notifications there. So
And
keep an eye on it.
are we going to release the merch?
15.
At
Episode 15.
At 15?
At 15.
All right. All right. So, my name is Luke,
My name is Andrew.
and this has been the Two Existential Dudes podcast. Thank you very much for watching.